Trump's new tariffs this Friday night, the turmoil across Canada, where trade talks stand.
Our Prime Minister has been working very diligently on this particular file.
What Canada is being advised not to do and how companies are trying to soften the blow. U.S. officials visit Gaza, what they're trying to accomplish and what starving residents want them to know. Celebrating Emancipation Day.
How far we have come and that we still need to continue to evolve.
Marking nearly 2 centuries since slavery ended in Canada. Plus, boy oh boy, why this bundle of joy is being called the world's oldest baby.
Global National, reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Governments and markets around the world are taking stock today after the passing of Donald Trump's deadline to impose new tariffs on trade. Dozens of countries are affected, but at 35%, the levy on some Canadian goods are among the highest. We'll hear from the Canadians on the front lines of Trump's tariff war in a moment, but we begin with Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa with the muted response from the federal government.
A tight-lipped Prime Minister letting his late-night statement do the talking. Mark Carney posting his greatest political hits at 12:30 a.m., saying he's disappointed with the 35% U.S. tariff and that the government is laser-focused on what we can control.
Should Canada retaliate?
Most other cabinet ministers not talking, but those who were showing confidence in Carney.
He's fully aware of some of the challenges as it relates to our relationship with the U.S.
Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc trying to mend that relationship, meeting with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick this week. But in the end, it's Trump who makes the final call.
He's just determined that he's going to take on Canada. I don't know the exact reasons. He uses different excuses, most of which are patently false.
The latest excuse, a recycled one, fentanyl, despite U.S. numbers showing that less than 1% of the drug going to the States comes from Canada. The facts not deterring the U.S. trade representative on Fox Business.
You know, we try to have a good relationship with these folks. They're right to our north, but we're also not going to stand by while Americans are killed or while the Canadians retaliate against our legitimate efforts to fix this.
Many issues.
Canadian retaliation irking the Americans, leading the Carney government to be extremely cautious on any pushback. Nearly 2 months after the U.S. put a 50% tariff on steel and aluminum, Ottawa's kept Canadian tariffs at 25%. But premiers like Ontario's Doug Ford and some Labour leaders want matching dollar-for-dollar tariffs.
I think it's really important that Canadians understand that we do have leverage, and in a fight like this, we have to be prepared to use it.
But that view isn't shared by all premiers, with Saskatchewan now calling on Canadian retaliatory tariffs to be dropped.
Canada should start moving towards a no-tariff trade environment by reducing the countermeasures or the counter tariffs that we have in place, but negotiating every step of the way to ensure that the U.S. is reciprocating.
The 35% tariff only applies to non-free trade goods, which the Bank of Canada estimates puts our effective tariff rate between 5 and 7%, a key talking point for Carney, who says that's lower than any other country, Neithu. But that's little solace for those who've lost their job or businesses on the brink of shutting down.
Yeah, I'm sure. All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mackenzie. So where do things go from here? Mercedes Stephenson is joining us now from Ottawa. Mercedes, what are you hearing on Parliament Hill?
Neithu, it is radio silence here. Officials are being very tight-lipped, but that silence speaks volumes. Typically on something this major, the Prime Minister would come out and speak. Mark Carney's policy has been not to negotiate in public, which can certainly be wise with Donald Trump, but in this case, it also leaves the nation with a sense of wondering what the plan is. Sources who I've spoken to in the lead-up to today suggested there was no viable deal on the table to be signed, and the feeling was that no deal was better than a bad deal being driven by an artificial deadline. The thinking being a little bit more time with higher tariffs for a better deal is worth it here in the halls of power in Ottawa as they calculate how to do that. And for Mark Carney, there's a lot at stake here politically. His whole election campaign was to take an elbows-up approach to Donald Trump, but he's had to make a number of concessions so far.
And Mercedes, it seems like Canada is being targeted here. Why?
I think in part, Canada feels it more than other countries because we're so dependent on the United States. And there's no question that Donald Trump seems to take a particular glee in insulting Canada. We're actually better protected in some ways than other countries because we have CUSMA here, which protects a number of our goods. And in some ways, those countries can also negotiate faster than we can because they're less intertwined and dependent on the United States. We don't have that advantage. And there's this other part, a policy sticking point, principles. For example, supply management on dairy. It's something that the Trump administration wants abolished, and the Canadian government wants to stand by. Major issues like that can slow down the trade deal on the real concern side, apart from what we hear in terms of the public rhetoric coming out of Ottawa or the White House. Neithu?
Right. Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa tonight. Thanks, Mercedes. The bulk of Canadian trade with the U.S. still falls under CUSMA, the Canada-U.S. Mexico free trade deal. But Trump's new tariffs will hit some sectors in this country hard. Mike Armstrong explains.
How Trump's tariffs will hit industries in this country is in some ways hard to predict. Even lumber companies that don't export to the U.S. are nervous about the impact. What happens when Canadian exporters are cut off from their American market?
If they stop exporting, then they'll be flooding our market. Everybody asks, well, are you exporting or how much you're exporting? That's not the issue. It's how it affects the general market.
Some companies have stockpiled inventory fearing Trump's tariffs. Edmonton's Legacy Heating and Cooling has put aside about 2 years' worth of units. It says the price of what's available has jumped because even though most of the products come from the U.S., a lot of the parts the U.S. companies use to make them are imported.
The raw materials can cross the border in the formation of that product several times before it lands at a homeowner's house. So how does that tariff break down? Well, these tariff numbers seem to be changing on a daily basis.
That uncertainty is a big problem, and it's affecting investment. Canadian companies are having trouble planning, not knowing what the situation will be in a year or even a month. Some are having to invest money that would have been spent in Canada instead on production in the U.S.
When we look at the uncertainty, it's affecting agri-food companies, manufacturing, mining, the wood industry. Nobody is exempted by this.
Now, there are some warning Canadian negotiators to be tough and not make a deal with the U.S. too quickly. No trade agreement, they say, is better than a bad trade agreement. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
In Gaza, 2 American diplomats visited a controversial U.S.-backed aid distribution site today. Envoy Steve Witkoff and Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee met with officials as international pressure mounts over the deteriorating humanitarian situation. President Trump says what's happening is real starvation. More than 1,000 people have died trying to get aid since May, according to the United Nations. Redmond Shannon reports.
For 2 months, this is how thousands of Gazans have found food. Walking to and from one of 4 aid hubs set up by the US and Israeli-backed GHF to feed more than 2 million people. Those too weak or too old to carry a sack of flour pick up what they can find. The United Nations says since late May, more than 1,000 people have been killed while trying to get aid. On Friday, GHF celebrated delivering 100 million meals since late May. That's about 2/3 of a meal per person per day. And it welcomed US envoy Steve Witkoff and US Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee. Witkoff said his visit will give US President Donald Trump a clear understanding of the humanitarian situation and help craft a plan to deliver food and medical aid.
I spoke to Steve Witkoff. He had a great meeting with a lot of people. He had a meeting on getting the people fed. And that's what we want.
This aid seeker says Witkoff should know that people are being humiliated and shot at just for a loaf of bread. This woman says she wants to see the old UN system reintroduced, one that had 400 distribution points. Since Sunday, Israel has allowed some more aid in via those traditional channels. Trucks often looted as soon as they cross the border. airdrops too. 6 countries parachuted pallets into Gaza Friday. The head of the UN's relief agency in Gaza said those are hugely inefficient and that if there is political will to allow airdrops, there should be similar political will to open the road crossings. Decisions thousands of kilometres away today could decide how and what the people of Gaza will eat in the coming weeks. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Kyiv is observing a day of mourning following a direct hit from Russia on a residential building yesterday. Flags were lowered to mourn 31 people killed, including 5 children. 16 other children were among the 150 people injured. It's believed to be the highest number of child casualties in a single strike on Ukraine's capital since October 2022. The assault destroyed a large part of a 9-story building and damaged other structures, including schools, medical facilities, and universities. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for stronger sanctions on Russia. Bracing for impact. Coming up, how countries around the world are reacting to upcoming U.S. tariffs. The new U.S. tariffs on Canada kicked in today, but for more than 36 other nations, Donald Trump offered a small reprieve last night. Their new rates begin on August 7th, with many exceeding the 15% baseline. Global's Candace Cole breaks down which countries have the highest rates and what it could mean for American consumers.
A dramatic widening of Donald Trump's trade war has sent global stock markets tumbling. 40 countries which Trump says the U.S. is running a trade deficit have been hit with 15% tariffs, and about 25 countries face even steeper rates. Brazil is at the top of that list, with a 50% levy set to take effect August 6th, despite being in a trade surplus with the U.S. The move largely in retaliation for the trial against former President Jair Bolsonaro, who is accused of plotting a coup.
The people running Brazil did the wrong thing.
Brazilians responded with a protest outside the U.S. Embassy. Syria hit with a 41% tariff even after Trump lifted sanctions on the country in June to support their, quote, path to stability and peace. Switzerland faces a 39% tariff, significantly more than its European neighbors, which negotiated a 15% levy earlier this week. In South Africa, workers are worried about how their 30% tariff will impact the job market.
30% is drastic. Entrepreneurs are going to have to somehow find a way to bring back the economy, but then at the end of the day, a lot of people are going to lose.
In the U.S., economists expect the tariffs to slow economic growth.
We also see investment being relatively weak, and we see consumer sentiment weakening in the United States.
As for retaliatory tariffs from the U.S. trading partners, economists warn that could result in a cycle of further escalation, but countries could form new partnerships, effectively icing out the U.S.
I think many of them have been on record in saying that those efforts have intensified since the Trump administration's policies come into effect. But at the same time, you're unlikely to see countries, for lack of a better word, abandoning the U.S. market anytime soon.
The big unknown is Chinese tariffs, which could have a major impact on supply chains in the U.S. Earlier this week, President Trump said talks with Beijing are moving along and expects to have a, quote, very fair deal. Candace Cole, Global News, Washington.
Donald Trump has fired the head of the U.S. Labor Statistics Department after a surprisingly dismal jobs update. He accused Erica McIntyre of rigging the stats to make him look bad. The U.S. economy added just 73,000 jobs in July, far fewer than expected. The May and June numbers were also revised downward by 258,000 jobs. A controversial $1 billion federal loan to BC Ferries was under the spotlight on Parliament Hill today.
We can stop this loan by the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and we can go to the table with BC Ferries and plan to do it and support our steel and aluminum workers here and shipbuilders here in this country. Are you standing by the loan?
My approach right now is to ensure that in the areas under my control, we are pushing for Canadian workers in the manufacturing sector and for the use of Canadian steel and aluminum.
Transport Minister Chrystia Freeland promised meetings to support Canadian jobs in a House committee probe, but did not call for the contract's cancellation. BC Ferries announced in June it had hired China Merchants Industry to build 4 electric diesel ships set to join the fleet between 2029 and 2031. A very special delivery ahead. The little boy who's already making big news. Celine Dion, one of the world-famous Dion quintuplets, has died at 91. Born in rural Ontario in 1934, she and her sisters were the first quintuplets known to survive infancy. They became Depression-era celebrities and were taken from their parents by the Ontario government at just 4 months old. Raised in Quintland, a government-run compound, and millions watched them grow up behind glass. Cecile later spoke out against the exploitation. A record-breaking baby has been born in Ohio. It grew from an embryo that's more than 30 years old, becoming the oldest baby on record. The MIT Technology Review reports that Thaddeus Daniel Pierce was born on July 26th. Mom and baby are both doing well. His parents adopted the embryo from a 62-year-old woman who had several embryos frozen in 1994. Scientists say the length of time an embryo is frozen isn't a concern.
There doesn't appear to be any degradation in embryo quality or risks of the embryos when they're with prolonged storage, because they're stored in liquid nitrogen, so very, very cold. So basically all sort of cellular processes stop.
Baby Thaddeus has a 30-year-old biological sister born to the donor mom who says they look alike. Tensions are rising in Africville, Nova Scotia, as descendants of the historic Black community rally behind a longtime resident and elder. The Africville Genealogy Society says a move to evict Eddie Carvery from his trailer parked on the land where Africville once stood is both disrespectful and divisive. As Ella MacDonald reports, they're calling for a mediated resolution that honors the community's history and respects its elders.
The AGS stands in solidarity with the protests. That's a voice of resistance.
Emotions were high at Halifax's North Memorial Library on Friday as members of the Africville Genealogy Society and descendants of the historic Black community made it clear they do not support the decision to remove Africville resident Eddie Carvery's trailer from the site.
After all the hundreds of years of suffering by the people of Africville, it's mind-boggling, but it's not about Eddie Carvery as a person. It's about the fact that we have an Africvillian who grew up and lived in Africville now being threatened to be thrown off of Africville land.
This comes after protests were held Monday in support of Carvery's right to stay parked where Africville once stood. Carvery began his peaceful demonstration on the land in 1970, shortly after the city demolished Africville and uprooted its residents.
But we never got paid. We never got reimbursed. What they did that to us was horrible. We wanted our homes back. And we get to this point, and we're still no further ahead.
But earlier this month, the Africville Heritage Trust, a board that runs a museum on the land, issued Carvery a notice informing him he would have to remove his trailer.
You know, he's been on the property for some time, but, you know, the trust is moving in new directions where his trailer could become a liability for the trust.
But some descendants wonder if a new development could be behind the museum's strong stance on the issue.
Transparency is very important. Also respect of elders in our community. If you want to talk and make change, you go to the people that put you there. Community comes first.
Irvin says any disagreement among them is discouraging. He's calling for a mediated discussion with the Heritage Trust to arrive at a resolution.
As long as there is a need, my board is willing to meet.
Ella MacDonald, Global News, Africville, Nova Scotia.
191 years of freedom. Next, how communities across Canada are celebrating a legacy of liberation. Across Canada, communities are marking Emancipation Day, the anniversary of slavery's abolition across the British Empire. While Canada is often remembered as a haven for those who escaped, the country's history with slavery is complex. For about 200 years, slavery existed in the colonies that would become Canada. The day honors the cultural contributions and resilience of Black communities. Megan King reports.
It's a day of countrywide celebration as Black liberation flags are raised to mark the 191st anniversary of slavery's abolishment across the British Empire. In Toronto, Emancipation Day's theme is Nula, meaning we are here.
This is an affirmation of survival, resistance, and cultural contribution as we celebrate the rich contributions of peoples of African and Haitian descent to our city and to our community.
A day of joyful celebration of freedom, Toronto has recognized Emancipation Day since 1998 and Emancipation Month since 2019. Nationally, the day has been marked since 2021.
It feels amazing to have this moment of community and have everyone come together and celebrate this part of our culture. There are so many different stories that kind of weave into what we know about Toronto, what we know about Canada. So I'm so excited to see everyone come together and celebrate as one.
For the fact that we are free, that we have democracy, that we have choices, and a time to have fun and really celebrate how far we have come and that we still need to continue to evolve as a people.
On the East Coast, a celebration in Halifax marked the day with many similar events across Canada taking place. For those who helped see this day recognized through years of petitioning, they're pleased to see Canadians, even for a moment, reflect on our history.
I hope that people will come away feeling joyful and inspired and have the opportunity to consider for themselves how important freedom is.
When we look at where we are now, not only as people of African descent, but as a world, the notion of emancipation has a long, long way to go.
Megan King, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is going to the dogs. We're showcasing patriotic pooches in Paris, Ontario, Kamloops, BC, and Saskatoon. Thanks for watching and hope you'll join us again tomorrow.